Okay, well, we'll get started here. Hello, everyone. I'm Libby Zamitis. I'm from the Hudson River Estuary Program, part of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and Cornell Water Resources Institute, and we're here today with the Climate Adaptive Design Studio. It's a program with Cornell landscape architects and Professor Josh Sarah. We're just going to give some brief introductory remarks to orient you to this project, what's going on in the community and this partnership we've been able to form, and then we're going to open it up to the open house where you can go around and talk to students, see their designs. We'll also have some food and coffee after these remarks as well. I'd like to ask Supervisor Dana Levenberg if she'd like to come up and say a few words.
So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Climate Adaptive Design Studio Open House for the fall 2019 semester, focusing on the waterfront in the town and village of Ossining. I am still so thrilled, many of you might have heard me say that multiple times already, that the folks from Cornell University and the Hudson River Estuary Program selected Ossining this semester to host this innovative program. I do want to just mention that we have County Legislator Catherine Borgia here today, which is great. We have some folks from the Village of Ossining staff as well as Town of Ossining, and we're so grateful to be partnering with the Village on this because we think it's a great initiative and it's been a great program. Since August, we've been working closely with the students from Cornell and their professor Josh Sarah as they learned more about Ossining, what makes our community tick, and how we can plan for the future of our waterfront in our communities. Participating in this program has helped me and my colleagues better understand what climate change really means for our community. And you really can't see what it means when you look at some of these designs. With the help of modeling and other data sources, it's clear that we have a lot of issues to contend with, even within the next few decades, as the Hudson starts to rise or cause severe flooding. As a waterfront community, it's necessary that we plan for the future and not just let the future happen to us, or I like to say, put our heads in the sand. We have the opportunity to be resilient and ensure better days ahead in spite of the many challenges we will likely face. Thank you, Professor Sarah, Libby, Liz, and all of the students, of course, for helping us understand how we can take an active role in planning for our community. This couldn't have come at a better time, as both the town and village of Ossining are opening up our comprehensive plans and utilizing this data, these ideas, and these designs from the CAD studio students will be an excellent component for consideration as we develop our comp plans. Of course, this program is just the start. I know we will take forward the valuable lessons we learned this semester, utilizing data and modeling in all types of planning that we undertake. I'm excited to see the completed student designs and take some pieces of these designs forward for implementation or visioning for the future. Remember, one of the main reasons the Ossining community was selected for this program was because of all the stakeholders that are so involved. You, all of you, are the reason we are here today, from our state and county representatives to Metro North to housing agencies, to the Sing Sing Prison Museum, houses of worship, property owners, developers, and everyone in between. You make our community what it is and what sets us apart from others. And I can't forget, of course, the Ossining High School Environmental Studies students who are also here today, and we're here from the start as well. And we're counting on you to help decide that the future remains bright for all of us. Please take your time this afternoon to review the students' work and share your feedback so that we can continue this momentum. Thank you so much.
I'd like to bring up Mayor Gearty to make a few remarks.
Such a friendly crowd. Well, thank you very much to everyone from Cornell and to our colleagues in the town and everyone who helped us get to this point where all of us are going to get to see the final proposals from the 11 students. Students, you have done amazing work. It has been such a rewarding experience to be part of your process. We, for those who haven't been with us, They came down for a visit, September? Their first in-person visit, and did a tour around. We've had some conference calls. Then a month ago, then in October they were here and they gave their draft presentations in small group table settings. And then last month, Dana and I and Councilwoman Feldman from the town and Manager DeTore from the village, the four of us took a road trip up to Ithaca and saw where their projects had gotten to. And today, I don't even recognize some of these. You've really taken to heart some of the ideas and changed your presentations. I'm so interested to see where they are now. There's been such an evolution of your projects. For those of us who are so intimately familiar with the Ossining waterfront, this process has been enlightening and a little bit disconcerting, because we have a very clear image of how we enjoy spending our time at the waterfront and exactly where all of those docks are supposed to be and where we like to sit and listen to music and have a drink and watch the sunset. And in 2080, it will not look like that at all. And so part of what has been so helpful is that these proposals are coming to us and they're based on facts and science, and they're coming to us from people who don't live here, who don't have a preconceived idea of exactly what bench they like to sit on and what needs to stay and what needs to look exactly the same 60 years from now. And so it's been a really valuable experience for us to have that kind of insight and these really innovative proposals from all of you. So thank you so much for your work. Thank you, Professor, and everyone from the Cornell Climate Adaptive Design Studio. It's really been a rewarding experience for Ossining, and it's going to dramatically impact the types of planning decisions that we make going forward. It is, as Supervisor Levenberg noted, a really ideal time for us. The village is updating our comprehensive plan right now, and exactly what the waterfront is going to look like is going to be different than it might have been if we had not had this really valuable experience. So thanks so much. I'm excited to see where we are today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as was already mentioned, we really came to Ossining because we were just blown away by the collaboration, the stakeholders involved just in submitting a letter of interest to this program, and the fact that it was the village working with the town. And so we were very inspired, but we did come here with not a lot of background information, and we've learned about your community, we've learned about what the future might look like, and here are our ideas. But from here, you get to decide what you want to do with them, and create really your own vision for the future. So it's great timing that you're doing the comprehensive planning now. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our program, the Hudson River Estuary Program. We're a part of the Department of Environmental Conservation, but we're a non-regulatory part. So we work with decision makers to make decisions that are good for the Hudson River Valley, the ecosystem, its people, because this is a really unique area. We're less than 15% of the state's landmass, but we have 85% of its habitat and species diversity occurs here. So it's a really rich, complex region, and we want to make sure that it stays that way. So we're here to help you with education, technical assistance, grants, things like that. So we hope that this is maybe only the beginning of our relationship working together. We work across all these different benefits. This program is through our Resilient Communities team. So as you know, whether you were living here or not, the hurricanes in 2011 and 2012 with Irene, Lee, and Sandy were really the focusing moments for us to get involved in this work of what's the future of our waterfronts. Thinking about risks of longer-term risks of sea level rise, and then these big risks of hurricanes here and there that are hard to predict. But we knew we wanted to do something about it, so we started working with communities on planning for that future and trying to be proactive. Because if you're not proactive and you don't create a vision now, then you kind of get stuck with what you get stuck with. So the main climate risks in New York State, we do our own modeling, the state funds modeling to understand how our risks are going to change in the future, because we take this really seriously and we want to help communities plan. So the three main risks are increasing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and rising sea level. Those lead to what we call risks, climate risks, which are the impacts to humans, which are flooding, heat, and drought. So Climate adaptive design tries to consider all of these risks, but flooding is definitely the primary one when you're looking at waterfronts. So New York State did officially adopt sea level rise projections a couple of years ago. So that means that they have to be considered in permitting applications, grant applications, things like that. So if you show that you're really thinking about these things, you're going to do well, and you're going to show that you're ahead of the curve. And it's clear that Ossining is taking these things seriously. I'm just going to look at the sea level rise projections modeled by Columbia University over the Ossining waterfront. So this is the main waterfront here. This is north in Krabucky, and then a little south at the prison. Now these are the high level scenarios, so the highest sea level rise projections. So on one hand, you could hope that you know, we only experience the low to medium scenario, but in terms of planning, you might want to plan for the worst. You might not. It's up to you. Most of the communities we work with choose to at least consider the worst case scenario as for planning, and this worst case scenario could become, you know, a medium scenario or a very possible scenario, or stay a worst case scenario. I just wanted to say that it's just modeling at this point. So here you can see is today's water line with the Hudson River in blue. This is today's 1% storm, which people call the 100-year storm, but it actually has a 1% chance of happening any given year. So if you live in a house for 30 years, that's a 25% chance of happening over that 30 years. So it's a much more common storm than people realize because they use this false term, 100-year storm. And that's only looking at past conditions, not future conditions. So you can see that a large part of the waterfront is already in this 1% 100-year flood zone, which many of our Hudson River front communities is the same type of picture. If you start adding in sea level rise, so you know the Hudson is an estuary, it's tidal, so it rises with the ocean, with the rest of the global mean sea level. So with 12 inches of sea level, which could happen well, I guess next decade, 2020s, you start to see these little areas of light blue. You don't see much change. Those are areas that could become inundated, just be part of the river again, and then the 1% storm zone is starting to get a little bit bigger. If you add in 30 inches of sea level rise, so 30 more inches of water onto the Hudson, that's when you start to see more significant changes. And right now, that's a high scenario for mid-century, 2050s. So this blue, again, this is projected to be inundated all the time, or at least at high tide. So this is really the river kind of taking back some of the land. Going out to 60 inches or 5 feet of sea level rise, which is later this century, 2080. Which is what these students are considering. You see a lot of blue and then darker blue, so the deeper inundation. So this is really, you know, a profound change for the waterfront, and it's not just Ossining. You know, most of the communities along the Hudson River are looking at this future, and this is why we're here today, is to start thinking about this now. And then finally, end of the century, 72 inches of sea level rise, a lot of blue and a lot of dark blue. So this is the opportunity, this is kind of the baseline for the CAD work, is, you know, what is the future, not today's waterfront, but the future waterfront, and how can we kind of change where our human uses are in a smart way so we don't have the same risk in the future. So that was kind of the depressing part. So the good part is that climate adaptation, adapting to climate risks, is to a large extent in your power. You know, mitigating climate change, trying to reduce emissions and reduce global climate change is absolutely vital. However, we all share the same atmosphere, so you can feel a little bit helpless when you work just in mitigation. So it's good to couple that with working with adaptation, you know, adapting to the changing risks. And that can be done on a landowner scale. You can adapt your home. It can be done on a business scale. You can adapt your business, or it can be done on a community scale. Thinking about, you know, where are our buildings, where are our parks, where are our roads, and how are those going to change over time. So that's the idea, the really fundamental idea to adaptation is resilience, this concept of being prepared for changes and a changing climate. So it's not just about, you know, being ready for like wetter or drier or colder or warmer, it's just about thinking in a resilient way of like how can we bounce back quickly after a storm? How can we be more adaptable, more flexible? So designing our systems with more of an adaptive mindset. And that's what they call, you know, adaptive thinking is like, you can't just set it and forget it. You can't just say, okay, we adapted all of our infrastructure, we're good now. No, you should really just be thinking in an adaptive way. Every few years revisiting your plans, revisiting the changing conditions, and it's a more flexible mindset of working together and really thinking about the future. So that's what we like to encourage. Now, the ultimate example of resilience and where we learn about the concept of resilience is really from plants and nature. Things that have adapted for millennia to things like extreme events and storms and droughts and floods, where we actually see plants after getting hit by a storm, they grow back deeper and stronger. Versus, some of the human systems that we build, like walls and roads, they tend to crumble and deteriorate over time. So we're kind of in this mode where we're learning about how to build like plants. And we can use plants, but we can also kind of mimic our own infrastructure off of plants. So this is really what we like to think about, because again, the Hudson Valley is this really unique ecosystem, so we want to maintain that. So how much can we use nature and natural features to achieve this more resilient future? And the great thing about plants and green features is that you get all these other benefits. You get cleaner air and cleaner water and fish habitat, and you sequester carbon, which helps reduce climate change. So it's kind of a win-win when it's appropriate to use. So this is our vision. This is our program's, our Resilient Communities vision, is that by the mid-century, by 2050, our communities, these Hudson Riverfront communities, are really global models for resilience and adapting to climate change using nature and natural based solutions. So we really see, even though it's easy to see kind of a future of restriction and a future of retreat, but there's also growth. If we do it in an intelligent way, we can really grow. We can have thriving waterfronts with lots of nature and lots of people, but with very minimal risks if we plan appropriately. So just wrapping up the CAD studio, really it's about inspiration and talking about climate change from a different perspective, about design and the future and what you want to see in the future. So that's why we're here today, and our program, the Estuary program, is here after the students go home and finish their semester. We're here to help you figure out the next steps. Get CAD into your comprehensive plan, maybe get another grant, do another project. So we're going to keep working with you. Some of the initial ideas is, to put these concepts on display to the public. There may be an opportunity to continue working with a CAD student on a special project. We've seen that before. Obviously integrate the concepts into plans, any and all plans where appropriate, and then apply for further funding. We do a little roundup of all the state funding that could be applied to waterfront resilience, and this year was over $150 million. So everything from planning to implementation. So and I have that handout where you enter. The handout is also available online, and you can see that it's categorized by different types of projects, from planning to emergency management to adapting structures, economic development, etc. So just in conclusion, I like to look back. Whenever I come to a new community, I like to look back at old photos and old paintings and to try to see how much has changed, and it always gives me inspiration for how much is possible in the future. The Hudson River has changed so much in the last few decades, cleaning up pollution and things like that, getting more people out to the river, more access. So imagine what's possible in the next 30 years, because we have better knowledge, better technology. So this is really about talking about that future and what your vision is for that future, and then we can talk about the steps to achieve it. All right, thank you, Josh, Sarah, Professor of CAD.
I wanted to say, first of all, I want to say thanks to a few people. First of all, the village and town of Ossining for having us down here and coming up to see us. It's really been tremendous getting to know you all and talk about things that I think are important for us and for you. And I really have deep gratitude to my students who've been along with this every step of the way. We have 11 fantastic and talented future leaders here, and so you'll get a chance to talk and meet with each of them, those that are here. I want to thank everybody who's here today visiting to hear more about what we do and things that you could be doing or thinking about doing. and also to our funders, Engage Cornell and the Water Resources Institute, as well as our partners at Scenic Hudson, and particularly the Department of Environmental Conservation, and all of those that have been invested in working at these ideas and things we've done and shared. And so we have 11 students in this class. They're third year graduate students. They're in their first semester of their third year of a 3-year master's program. Design is a really interesting career path to take. Does anyone have any design background here? Architects, landscape architects, graphic designers? Okay, good, there's a number of us here. And engineers too. There's really interesting ways we do our work, and so our work is very visual. We talk about technical things in technical courses. We learn about theory in theoretical courses. But a lot of those things, it's important that we practice them. Design is a practice. Much like engineering or law or medicine, you get better the more you do it. And so that begins in the studio, where you'll see a lot of our students working day in and day out. I think this is a 5-credit class, but we meet for 9 hours a week, and there's at least, 20, 30 hours a week of activity going on in combination with the class time that happens. And so these students have been working really hard on these design concepts, and we're thrilled to be able to share them with you today. Many hours have gone into this work, and so this is actually, as Libby mentioned, this is our 5th municipality we've worked with. This is our 7th studio. We've worked in City of Hudson, Village of Catskill, Village of Piermont, City of Kingston, and now in the village and towns of Ossining. And so we're just thrilled to be here. It started out a long time ago as just an idea about how we might help people visualize their own futures. There's 2 things we ask at the beginning of this exercise or this semester when we meet with folks in the village and the town. The first one is, what are your concerns about climate change? I think it's really important to get out there and talk about those initially. And equally important is, what is your vision for what your waterfront could become? Because really that's at the meeting of those 2 things is really where the true potential for this village and town and many others up and down the Hudson exists. I often say that a lot of cities want to move towards their waterfront, and a lot of waterfronts are starting to want to move towards the cities and their downtowns with climate change. And so that's that space that we need to be working in between those 2 things. Village and Town of Ossining, Fall 2019, here we are. This is our class. You'll get to meet 9 of us are here actually today. There's an incredible amount of work that these students have done and will continue to do with you today during the open house. I also want to acknowledge my research fellow, Liz Favis, who's here in the crowd somewhere. Liz, thank you, Liz, for everything you've done. Kevin Kim has been my teaching assistant this semester. He's just really amazing. He's over there in the corner. I bet I can't get him to wave his arm too much. But he's done a lot of amazing things in the background. I also have several research assistants, Tim and Ethan and others that have been working in the background as well. And so we're glad to be here. These are all of us that have been involved. I mentioned the 2 funders in Village and Town of Ossining and our key partner, the DEC Hudson River Estuary Program. I wanted just to talk for a minute about the studio and how it's set up. There's really 4 key steps in our process. The first one is to understand what climate change is and what those impacts are. The second thing we want to do and need to do is understand the site. Some of that we can do technically. A good chunk of that we do by working with the municipal and community members to understand their point of view about what they know about the site, but also what their vision is. And then from there we develop climate adaptive design options and design and evaluate proposals. So the key things on assessing climate change impacts, Libby went over. It's a lot about understanding that there's going to be sea level rise projections that are going to move all up and down the Hudson over the years, and then particularly we work with extremes of precipitation that lead to surface flooding, as well as a number of other flood environment scenarios. The second thing we need to do is understand the site. I mentioned the technical information we develop. We do a lot of work in the background, and we're also interviewing and meeting with folks. I'm only going to show you a couple things that we do, that we know about the site from that research, but there's many, many other things that we've discussed and worked on. We talked a little bit about flood projections. I put these up here because I think it's worth looking at what our 10-year or our 10% flood is right now today, but also understanding how that's going to be much more significant out in the future when we have sea level rise added on top of it, and what some of those localized impacts might be. That's a relatively frequently experienced flood event. When you get the full impacts of sea level rise, you're going to find that there's permanent inundation, meaning things are underwater almost all the time. And that will become even more extreme when there's a flood event. Flood events are temporary. Inundation is something that has a permanent wetted perimeter. And so that's a concern, and we need to be aware of those two different things. We took a look at the community to understand what some of the data were telling us. I'll move through this pretty quickly. Also, we took a look at buildings and land use, some of the existing plans and some of the existing conditions that are present. Also, we're real interested in the history of the waterfront. What do we know about what has happened here before, and how might that inform some things we do moving into the future? We took a look at open spaces that are here. There's two fantastic parks down at the waterfront, and then also to understand how water interfaces with those, to understand the impacts on open space as well as some of the built parcels. I should point out, actually, all of these graphics I'm showing are coming from the students that you'll have an opportunity to talk to today, and so I didn't make any of these. This is the incredible work of these students. We take a look at ecosystems and impacts on ecosystems of climate change. When water levels rise, so do the suitability of certain habitats for different species and their conditions. And so that's also something we look at. You'll see some students talking about that. We also took a look at the shoreline conditions that are present on the site, so understanding whether there's riprap, whether it's hardscape, whether it's naturalized. These are just a few of the things we looked at. We were really interested in the circulation, how you get down to Ossining, and then also how you walk around, and how some of that is ideal and some of that has opportunities for enhancement or improvement. I love this quote that someone mentioned: the story of Ossining in many ways is the story of its waterfront. So a lot of it comes together at the waterfront. Ossining is a magnificent place. It also, and it's downtown, and there are some of the neighborhoods that are around, and it also has an intimate link to the waterfront that could be strengthened. So we look at that as well. From there, actually, we look at different case studies around the world that people have wrestled with some of the same questions. There are very few precedents for cities of your size. In so many ways, I would consider yourself a leader in understanding not only the risks, but what your vision is and how you might phase that in over time. And it's something that you might ask the students about as they have developed their concepts. They're thinking about how you might do this in a stepwise basis in a way that could be commensurate with the scale of the municipality that you live in today. After we understand a lot of those things, we try to develop ideas and we go through them over and over. This has been a very iterative studio. I think probably we've had 6 or 8 different evolving design concept review sessions in this course, and so it's really important to get feedback. And today's another day to get some feedback from you guys as we look at our work in its final stage for us, but also how it could be a beginning for some of your own efforts. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the open house. None of this is binding that we're doing. We want to share some important ideas for you. It's not required, and there's no urban policy built around this right now or decisions made around this. But what it is an opportunity for us to share some ideas, looking at what some of those data are saying and things we've been hearing, and understanding some of the land uses on the site and the futures that we've heard about and that are also possible that we've been thinking about, to really have a discussion and an opportunity for imagining the future of Ossining and its waterfront. And the nice thing about it is we have as a baseline some of that science where we begin from. So you'll see examples of projects that are both visionary and some that are quite practical and some in between. You'll see projects where you might say, I love that one, I want to do that whole thing. perhaps, but you may also find aspects of individual projects that you're more attracted to. And so looking into the work, I think, is as or more important so you can understand what may have traction for you. Issues of access and recreation, destination and character and sense of identity, making a memorable waterfront is something we thought about a lot. You'll see economic issues and opportunities as well as ecosystem thinking coming into this work. And then also I mentioned as a number of times flooding and inundation. Keep an eye out for a strong unifying concept, a big idea behind the work that usually begins with perhaps a title and a story that we can open up these design ideas, these alternative design strategies with. You'll see folks proposing reinforcement. You might imagine things like a levee under those conditions. The ability to adapt, to work with water, possibly through temporary flooding, but then also being able to get back on track after that flooding is over. And then in some cases, you'll see places where the students have decided it may be better to actually strategically relocate because of some of the flood and inundation concerns. Sometimes these are actually very complex questions, and so there's a lot of goals along the waterfront. And so sometimes these things can be complementary and sometimes they can be competing. And so you'll see students working with all of those and making choices based on their best design observation as well as some of the feedback that we've received. We're always thinking about uses on the waterfront that are enhanced by water. And we're always thinking of uses along the waterfront that really need to have water. And so those are things that folks have spent a lot of time working on, emphasizing. So in the open house, you can expect to do a number of different things. One being that I think this is the kinds of things we can all do today, whether we're students or others here as community members, including myself, listening to different ideas, asking questions about those ideas and concepts, as well as sharing what's important to you. And maybe perhaps as someone who's a member of this community, local knowledge that you may be able to bring to bear. And then finally, discussing some of the futures that you envision for your waterfront. I think that that's something that we'd like to do today. A very important outcome we seek in this process is the ability to start and continue dialogues that maybe began in September when we started, continued on through this semester, and we hope carry on well beyond. And so we look forward to talking more with you today. I think that's all I have. So thank you very much. It's been a thrill already, and so I look forward to talking with each and every one of you soon. Are we good? Okay, I think that means we're good. So why don't I just invite the students to come up. We'll put the boards back that were here initially. We have 9 designs that we can share today. 4 of them are going to be in that front entrance area where you came in. There's one sort of in transition on its way in the hallway that you may have seen there. And then we'll have 4 or 5 sets of boards in here. And so please make your way to circulate around. We also have refreshments in the hallway, things to drink and eat. We'll bring them in here. Oh, we can't bring them in here. So, but there will be plenty to see in here. So please mingle. And I'll ask the students if you could just come up. We'll try to engage as many people as possible. And please feel free to just walk through and feel at home here because this is your community and we're glad to be here. Yes?
Josh, we just let folks know that all 11 of the proposals will be available online
Yes.
in the coming weeks for folks to take a look at.
Excellent. Yeah, very good point. The mayor said all of these designs will be available online and available for continued viewing and discussion in the next few weeks. So that's something to look forward to. You'll probably get a notice about that. Okay, great. Oh, one more question.
What's going to be online, the posters, or like a video with the student narrating through the poster?
You ask a good question. It's possible. I know we'll at least have one of those and maybe 2. So please stay tuned, okay?
Okay.
All right, great. Yes. Oh, and Liz has got something else. Liz LaJudas, Resilience Consultant. Our key partner, yes.
Thank you. So I'm Liz LaJudas. I coordinate a lot of the field visits and work with the community. And I think I told most of you as you came in, but I just want you to be sure that we have 2 ways today that we're gathering feedback from folks. And one is, there's just this simple feedback form. It has the names of all the student designs. And you're welcome to jot down ideas that jump out at you as being interesting or something that you'd like to see pursued. And so if I didn't give you one of those pieces of paper, please see me at that desk where you signed in so that you can have that to just to cue you to ideas that you like and to help us as we continue to work with the town and the village to identify ideas that are of interest. And the second thing is that we are always trying to improve the Climate Adaptive Design Studio, and so we have a formal survey process at the end of each meeting that we do with the community. So we do have a stakeholder survey form. It's just 5 questions, and if you're willing to fill that out at the end of the time here today, that's very helpful to us for improving the process as we go forward. So thank you very much.
The inspiration I had for this project came in large part from Riverkeeper, which is already located on the waterfront. And what I'm interested in exploring is how a community can participate and engage with climate change as it's happening, so that it's not a fixed plan or a fixed moment in time we're talking about. We're talking about basically a shift in culture that needs to occur. And I'm thinking that this will occur through participating and engaging with the environment. So I've really thought about this future waterfront as a place that has lots of opportunities for that participation and engagement. So to start with, this is my concept diagram that's looking at kind of the overarching way of spatializing the new development. This green is representing the Sing Creek ecological corridor. This orange is representing areas that are outside the 2080 100-year flood, so are the best places for new development. This tan color is representing areas that might be the best suited for waterfront, water-dependent uses in the future. This teal area is representing the Depot Plaza, which is currently the parking lot for the train station. And historically, it was actually called Station Plaza, and was a much more picturesque place than it is now. And then these green circles are representing the importance of linking the waterfront with downtown. So I'm basically proposing a move of linking downtown with waterfront through the creation of something called a Station Plaza. And as you can see in some of these drawings, the Station Plaza is this little brown area that could be an aspect of the waterfront that gets developed right away, that even in the 2020s becomes a reality. And it would be kind of a new downtown core that the activity of the waterfront could radiate out of. And it would be a place that is not currently very susceptible to flood, and would be a place where people could enjoy themselves as pedestrians. So it's a pedestrian-only corridor. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm thinking about different ways that people can participate and engage in collective action so as to be responsive and basically flexible to whatever changes are coming, because really we don't know, and we can't make strict plans. We need to be responsive as communities. So some of the ways that could happen is protests or meetings in the waterfront, or continuing the water quality monitoring that Riverkeeper already does, and maybe taking that to a whole new level that could be something that's more related to sea level rise, and then also, of course, recreation. Kind of moving through the phasing plan, as I mentioned, the creation of Station Plaza is sort of the first thing that could occur. This orange color is representing new construction. So I'm proposing a new parking lot and some possibly mixed-use development and some other high areas that are in high ground. And then by the 2020s, there's going to need to be retrofitting to, as the tan color, retrofitting to a lot of the buildings that are currently right on the waterfront. And then kind of moving into the 2050s, we're seeing the construction of a little bit more new buildings. The marinas might become more floatable buildings, and I'm basically proposing that the area that's currently west of Water Street to be an area that the marina buildings could move into as time goes by. And also, you know, parking garages as being a way to really utilize space better. And this brown color is representing the pedestrian path, because I think that's really important, that the waterfront really doesn't have a good pedestrian loop right now. So that could be integrated. And then kind of moving to this next poster, this is trying to explore these ideas a little bit more. Looking at these little diagrams here, I'm showing 3 potential edge conditions. So one would be the naturalized edge condition that would be like on a beach and possibly other areas of the waterfront. But I think that a gabion wall with some vegetation could be a good choice for a lot of other areas in the waterfront, that you still want to hold the edge of the water in place, but the vegetation could really help that area be more responsive to flooding and protect it from storm surge. And then bulkheads in areas that are where access is really important, like with the marinas. And then this is a section here taking place in the 2080s. This is the section line. So it would be an area where currently there is a marina, but in this section I'm proposing that this center area could become more of a public space while the marinas are on either side, and that there could be a dock that would enable some more public access. So this is just kind of showing what that transition might look like, that in the 2050s, when the rail is still on site, that people are participating in the environment and working to build this new park or planting vegetation. And then this second section, section B, takes place here. And that's kind of going through this new station plaza. The station plaza would include using some of the existing buildings on the waterfront and adding some other new ones. And this here is a section representing 2050. So here we see the Harbor Square Apartments, a pedestrian bridge over the railroad. And then this is Station Plaza. As you can see, it's been flattened and elevated a little bit, because right now the street goes downhill towards the waterfront, and I'm proposing that it could be a leveled area. But then by 2080, that we're seeing a swale and gabion walls that would, the idea would be to encourage the development of wetlands, because we have read a lot about how wetland habitat is really important, both for protecting people from the water, but also for animals and fish. And you might notice that in this section and in this plan, there is not a railroad. So my rationale for the railroad is that although I think transit-oriented development is extremely important, that doing it in a floodplain is not really the most ideal, especially when we have this pressure of water. So I think that instead of trying to build an entire monstrous rail line all the way from here to New York City, that the rail should, if we are going to do that much construction, that maybe we could just move it to a place that's higher ground, possibly Route 9A, and instead we could really allow the Ossining waterfront to be a place for people to experience the water. And also by 2080, New York City is going to be under quite a lot of pressure as well as far as the water, which is a difficult thing to think about, but that was sort of the rationale in my design. And then moving to the last board over here, this is sort of a zoom in of the Station Plaza area. This is Station Plaza, and I'm envisioning this as a place where people can really gather and share ideas and be a community. And I think that feels like something that would be important to Ossining because I already get the sense that there's a strong community here. I've proposed moving Riverkeeper to the head of the plaza and putting it adjacent to the Sing Sing Kill, which is expanded or widened and naturalized in some areas. These buildings that are striped are zoned just commercially, while these buildings are zoned as a mixed use where there could be some housing. But these buildings I'm proposing would be very small and on the human scale, so that they would provide a kind of unique experience for people to have this really interesting walkable place with coffee shops or restaurants that would again be something that could be built right away because it's currently in a parking lot that could be used differently, but that could really be an attraction to people coming to Ossining to have this kind of walkable environment, and I've tried to depict it in these drawings on the edge. And I'm also proposing a water sculpture of some kind that could reflect the changing water levels and the changing flood levels to bring about more awareness about that flood and rainfall. And then I've added the Riverkeeper patrol boat in the background to try to bring out that idea again of this importance of this participation and kind of owning, having a sense of ownership through action. That if we are actively engaged in our environment, then we know when the changes are coming and what changes are coming, and that might enable the response to that change to be better. And this is a section of the Stamen Plaza area showing that it is a kind of green infrastructure, that it would have some flood storage. It's also shown here. This is an area for the flood to be stored when it does flood. Based on, obviously the data we have is not 100%. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but looking at the data that was available to us, there is a lot of inundation surrounding the apartments. So even if the apartments themselves might not be underwater, the area all around them could be underwater by 2080. And also because of their location, they would be susceptible to a lot of flood over the years. So that maybe in 60 years there would be enough damage from flood that it would make sense to have that there any longer. And also it could enable there to be space in other places that would be more public if that landmass wasn't there, the water could go there, and then there would be less water in other places.
Sorry, can you just point it out again where it is on the map?
So it's easiest to see in this phasing plan. So this is Harbor Square, and so basically this area right here is, I'm proposing, would be inundated, but I'm preserving this, which is the current harbor, where the wishbone is. This is the new proposed dock that some other people have been working on to expand the ability for larger boats to dock.
So as in the 2080 plan,
Yeah.
where you're actually proposing that development take place, what does development look like that's climate adaptive? Like what, I know that you've talked about the uses, but structurally, how do you build that so that then it can last another 100 years or something like that? Or, it sounds to me like that's the plan, is to evolve the waterfront so that whatever then gets developed there, subsequent to this phasing in plan, could remain a lot longer.
Yeah, well, so for example, these buildings are all floatable buildings, and those are based on ideas from like the Netherlands and other areas in Northern Europe where they build floatable buildings. So those...
That's like for the marina.
Yeah, the marina.
Right. I'm talking about, I guess I'm not asking more about these.
Okay. Well, so this over here is safe from the 100-year floodplain. So these buildings would be normal. And then these buildings, the intervention I've proposed is a leveling of the plaza so that it's actually a little bit higher. So I've raised it up between 1 and 6 feet so that it might get a little bit of flooding in the 100-year flood, but only like a foot or so of water. And so those buildings would need to be flood-proofed on the first floor, but I don't imagine them being very big, that they would be kind of more modern buildings that are built to have a little bit of flood occur, and again, they would be for commercial use, not for someone to live in.
Then in terms of the rail is here before it goes away completely. But are you assuming then that it will have been raised even to that at that point, or is it just staying where it's at and that's okay?
In 2050?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that it needs to be raised by 2050. The most pressure it gets is by that 2080 date. So by 2050, it's not inundated at all, but by 2080, there's half of it's inundated. So yeah, this could be the same. I think it would be great to have some more green infrastructure plantings to help a little bit for when it does flood, so that it doesn't affect it quite as strongly, even just rain events. You know, I'd have more plantings around as a buffer. Yeah, I don't think it would need to move by 2050 or change from what it is now.
I just want to say that I think that, you know, I really like the way that you've developed and evolved your plan and really show how economic development can work within the context of sea level rise, and I think that you've really taken into account a lot of the historic pieces, although I don't exactly know what happens to the Ossining Community Club, but I'm sure that question is going to come up. That's
well, I had it being retrofitted in 2020s.
Right.
By 2080, it would need to be relocated, and I don't have it on the map.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, just thinking about Station Plaza and having done a lot of the research, and I think even some of those silhouettes look like our actual high school students.
Yeah, they are.
Which is nice to see that, you know, we have the involvement of the community to continue to figure out ways that we can work with the water instead of against the water, while also taking into account that, you know, if you do have structures that need to be sustainable, you have to figure out where the water is going to go when it does flood. So I think, you know, it has a lot of realistic potential that you've built in. Of course, the pieces that are hard to imagine are large projects like I can't even remember the name of it. Harbor View, Harbor Square. I was going to say Harbor Square, and I was like, no, that's not it. Harbor Square going away and having to relocate many, many residents, and the train not being there. Those are hard for us to wrap our heads around. Not that we don't have to, but I think that it's difficult.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Yeah.
So, first off, I was really inspired by the idea of trying to establish a sense of timelessness, because when we're dealing with these highly speculative futures, we know, as we've studied history before, things change quite drastically sometimes, not only in our culture, but our physical choice of aesthetic. So some of the things I started to establish as a design palette had more to do with these, what I was dubbing as kind of timeless qualities, things like the rocky shoreline, the woodland that would have been found along the Hudson for hundreds of years. Topography, of course. There's so much interesting topography in this zone, so that was going to be really important, the idea of elevating and excavating in key areas to kind of give that variety to an otherwise very flat, you know, area along the waterfront. And then thinking, of course, about people and advocacy, because we have design scenarios in many different places, and it's not often that we get as much interaction with the communities we're designing for as we have for Ossining. So in this particular case, after some of the conversations we had in September and October, I started to identify a few demographics, of course not everybody, but a few that could help me think about these different nodes, hopefully through the lens of how they might experience them. And that's everyone from incarcerated citizens in Sing Sing Correctional Facility, your average family, young family, established family, tourists, of course, visitors. Me having lived in New York City before, I know people commute up to see things like Dia Beacon, Storm King Art Center, and I can really see this waterfront, especially with the incorporation of the big museum development, becoming a destination as well. And I've kind of highlighted in the darker blue some of the actual structures that I think can be economic drivers. So you have everything from residential, like Harbor Square, that's already beginning to do that. And then really looking at Water Street, of course, as a really nice new way to kind of bring in mixed retail, residential, thinking about really taking away some of the large parking spaces and tucking them into some of those vertical buildings that would be built along Water Street, which affords us the chance to build up some of this topography and get more of that naturalistic scene along the actual waterfront. So what I've essentially done was identify these 4 zones that I think not only sew the waterfront together in unison, but create these sort of very diverse ambiances and feels. So for the Sing Sing Prison Museum zone, which I'm still in my scheme imagining the correctional facility still having some sense of occupation, what would start as this sort of rehabilitation and re-entry program for citizens, getting them to not necessarily be welding things like license plates, but actually working on plant nurseries that can produce a type of material that can be outsourced to the rest of the waterfront, which not only gives them a sense of agency and value for when they, re-enter society, but it's giving back to the community that they're currently even being held within. So it'd start off as that, and then, in the next coming decades, as they sort of establish these living shorelines, these beautiful ecologies, it would almost become like an outdoor exhibit for the prison museum. So you have the beautiful artifact of the 1825 sail block, but now you have more of this almost landscape exhibit in the form of the living shoreline. And so that's what I'm calling the Reverie. And as you move into the central part of the waterfront, you have the harbor, of course, and that's, I think, one of the biggest nuclei right now, with the playground, the big gathering spaces that they have for 4th of July. And in this particular scheme, I'm sort of imagining raising the land and kind of framing it to sort of protect, slow down some of that wave action, slow down the water, allow for plants and people to occupy, even when the water's rising, some of these high points. So over time, they almost become like these little rivering islands that eventually you'd kind of have to want to connect with maybe some elevated paths. But as far as the activity there, a lot of that I think would retain its character. I think it's super valuable to have that large gathering space. The real difference here is that you'd be manipulating the landform itself and adding a different vegetative design strategy essentially. And then you kind of move over to Sing Sing Kill, right? And the 2 zones that I have there, one I'm calling a stony place after the famous Sing Sing sort of origin in its name. And for there, I think what's really important to consider about the Kill is that even though you have the Hudson, which is this massive, super majestic waterway, there is also a very much more discreet waterway when it wants to be kind of entering the Hudson right along our waterfront. And in this particular case, we found that the Kill is highly channelized, it's extremely narrow, and it has had historic flooding. So in my scenario with Stony Place and Water Street terraces, it's really all about widening some of that shoreline along the Kill to kind of create this scenario where on any normal day, the creek would be trickling through and you'd have a lot of dry terraces where people could go down, into the area, gather. But then in moments where you do have a lot of that runoff coming down from uphill, all of a sudden that water has somewhere to sort of gather and slowly make its way down into the Hudson as opposed to rush and gush and inundate everything. And as far as the Stony Place goes, really I'm imagining this just really gorgeous rocky berm, sort of really inspired by the picturesque, the history of romanticism on the Hudson River. Really thinking of what could be a sense of timelessness, right, in the palette, as I was mentioning. And in particular, looking at the darker blue as some of those economic drivers for residential opportunity, mixed retail, different kinds of commercial uses that can not only serve the local citizens, but attract some of those out-of-towners like the New Yorkers who aren't too far, who might find themselves wanting to start and maybe make a day's trip out of coming to Ossining. So I wanted to kind of think about that sense of visitation and from the outsider's point of view as well. As far as the drawings over here, they're really just looking at the sectional quality in which the design lays within the larger topography. I've kind of put together a few collages giving you a sense of what some of that materiality could look like. And then in particular, I wanted to think of what the boater's perspective might be as well. Because we're not only experiencing the waterfront, of course, standing along it, but potentially being out away from it from a boat's perspective. And I think sort of imagining what that scene might look like for someone who's maybe just boating right by and not stopping at all. But then wondering, hey, maybe I should come back on my way back down, and anchor or dock somewhere to just spend a few hours or half a day. That's essentially the gist. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to
see if
answer.
anybody else has any questions or comments or thoughts.
What do you envision happening to the railroad?
So with the rail, I very purposefully wanted to think about projecting this scheme at an in-between between now and the most extreme, right? So I chose the 30-inch sea level rise, 2050s, right, just a few decades away. I've kept the rail in this particular scheme, assuming that with some of these more cultural and physical changes, the proper policy and entities would start to accommodate accordingly. According to the projection for this particular time period, the rail itself isn't inundated unless it's a storm event, which are more temporal, right? So keeping it, most of the tactics here are a little bit more within a realm of pragmatism and modesty, I guess one could say, within what might be possible. But yeah, essentially the rail stays. Much of the character and the programmatic usage of these spaces remains as well. It's a lot of really taking some of these timeless elements in the design palette, like manipulation of topography, different kind of planting strategies, to not only accommodate those shifting shores, but inspire cultural shift as well with some of the territorial use.
So is there still, since, first of all, I just want to say I think you did a great job laying out for us the transition and all of these separate sections. It makes it very easy, I think, for the layperson to kind of understand your thought process and your vision, and also what it looks like. I do have a question about the use in the section number 2, just because that happens to be a particular area of my focus. In terms of, like, a lot of our high school students have been very interested in reopening the beach. And I'm not sure if beach use with all the rocks is still something that you're envisioning as part of this or not. Is that still access for swimming?
So when you look at the harbor, right, you sort of see these two zones that I've outlined in red. Those are the zones where you would actually build up the topography, use a bit of that rocky materiality. But in between those, you do have these low-lying areas, and I did very purposefully retain that kind of nice little cove that's occurring there with the beach. Now, as far as the materiality of the beach, I think as we see water coming in, really rethinking how you pave or set some sort of foundation for that is going to be integral. But in particular, one of my responses to some of that expressed desire from the youth to find a place of respite was to also consider what other areas, even outside the Hudson itself, could offer for them. And so in this case, an area even tucked away from the kind of more family-dominated environment where I can imagine these adolescents wanting to sort of gather around a coffee shop along Water Street and still find an outdoor space that provides the same sort of thrill, calm and kind of beauty that areas along the harbor and the main sort of park today offer, but kind of giving them a bit of that variety as well.
And in terms of, I love what you talked about in terms of the what's happening inside the prison to help out with landscape materials and trying to think about how that would, help along the entire Hudson. That's really interesting. And then
The other thing that I thought was great was, I just wanted to know about was sort of the outdoor performance space, if you had any thoughts about that and where that would end up being, if at all, or does that go away? And if you could talk a little bit about the Ossining too.
Well, so much of the current usage of the harbor, I'm imagining taking place just the same. So as far as small concert gatherings and such, I think that you would sort of want to work with that new topography. One of the benefits of having some of those slopes is that depending on once we get back to the drawing board and flesh some of these details out more, you can imagine how nice it might be to have a natural amphitheater, just having that slope in and of itself. And that's kind of what I'm imagining for the harbor berms. But then you have a stony place, which currently is filled with these giant oil containers. And I think that potentially also could become a really nice gathering spot as well as the threshold between the current park and the marina and the kind of boating community zone. And that's sort of meant to incentivize the bridging of these two sorts of uses that are currently going on.
It seems like you really gave a lot of thought to this. Again, really took into account a lot of the historic aspects of our community and tried to incorporate those into your design as an evolution instead of a revolution, which I think is helpful. We're all very curious about what's going to happen with Metro North and how that's going to impact in the long run all of this. But I think that this is thoughtful enough that it could evolve with or without the train being there.
That is what I was going for.
Right.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about that amphitheater, I think a little bit about Providence, Rhode Island, and along the river, which they daylighted, and they have like all these performances now out there. So I don't know.
And that's what I'm imagining with the Water Street terraces as well. So you can kind of have that sort of terracing amphitheater quality not only in the harbor, but even in those areas where if we're widening the area along the Kill, more often than not, it's not going to be filled with water. It's only during those events after a heavy precipitation that you, almost like a retention basin that slows the water down. But then in those longer periods of dryness, that's where people can start to go and gather and actually have cultural events. So you kind of have this duality between the landscape and the hydrologic performance and the more human cultural performance as well.
This event. Anybody else?
So another thing that I was
I did a similar style project when I was in school, working with a local municipality. That was up in Vermont, University of Vermont.
Of cut and fill operations, so that Water Street now becomes the new waterfront. What's ever on the water side of Water Street becomes a floodable landscape that's fully accessible to the public, and then behind it is where we start investing really heavily. Cut and fill operations are going to be hyper expensive, so I'm suggesting that there's a massive influx of infrastructure, and so that starts with the museum, the prison museum that comes online in the short term, but it also starts coming into this nature culture district through a series of investments that move from an art museum, performance arts, amphitheater that's available for the population, and other infrastructure that's water dependent, so heavily invested over here. Invested also into the environmental and ecological, what the Sing Sing Kill brings to the table, because to me it's hyper important, along with the wetlands that are going to come online in the 2080s. This is going to be a really ecologically rich area. It already is, but I want to leverage that even more so that we can start bringing more people to the community and start developing a waterfront that is resilient. Now, as far as infrastructure goes, I'm saying that Hunter Street will be developed really heavily, and that becomes kind of the new waterfront that is invulnerable. It's never going to get hit by water. And you can bring it all the way down to the museum, and you can keep on coming on. So there's a big loop that goes all the way up to 9A. So that there could be a bus loop, it could be a trolley line, but it could be something that brings the population down from the uplands, right, up near 9A, but all the way down to the waterfront. And you don't need a car to do that. If you can do it with a bus, you can bring a population that maybe doesn't need a car, can't afford a car, doesn't want a car, and then bring them down to the waterfront that again is going to be available for the entire population. It's floodable, but all the infrastructure is behind that line of defense in the sand, behind that Water Street line.
What do you mean by cut and fill?
Yeah.
What's the term you're doing?
Yeah, so
cut and fill costs a lot of money.
yeah, so my suggestion is this. So if something is going to become flooded in the future, stepping forward before that happens, let's say in the Sing Sing the Sing Sing Prison West area, we know that a lot of this landmass is going to be underwater. So in the short term, take some of that landmass and put it somewhere else that's going to be flooded in the future so it doesn't flood. So for example, if you start building up this area where the current beach is and making it so that up until the 2080s, you can still move through that space, then the cut is happening here, the fill's happening here, and in other strategic locations that I've got listed on that second board. So you can see where assets start coming offline, they get moved to somewhere else that's not as vulnerable, and then that creates an opportunity for something else to take its place. And in my mind, that something else is a waterfront that's available and accessible to the public.
So I missed the part, all of that green is water dependent or not?
All the green essentially, any green that's below this red line is going to be a floodable landscape. So essentially anything that you see in green is a public kind of park area that's floodable, especially in this area where the Sing Sing Kill is.
And the white, what looks like a path is a raised walkway? What is that?
So anything in white is infrastructure. So these buildings designate different assets that I say would come online, like an amphitheater, or like an arts and culture museum, or a performing arts center, or infrastructure in the form of roads that create bus lines or throughfares for people or for vehicles.
Great, so this was what I meant. Is this that's pedestrian?
That is pedestrian. It's the Riverwalk.
Got it.
It's the Riverwalk that now comes online, connects Yonkers to Ossining, and then points forward. But it's a pedestrian path. It's not raised. No, it's not raised.
Oh, it's not raised.
It's raised to some degree when I put fill in, but it's floodable.
I see.
So you might not be able to use it in flood, but you can use it otherwise. Like all the other times, it's not floodable.
I see. Okay, floodable. Gotcha. What kind of materials do you use, or you see that you would use for something like that is floodable, that would then sustain flooding and still be, in pretty good shape after the flood?
Yeah. So I think that starts with the edge condition. So that means that either, in my mind, the waterfront gets tapered in a very low grade all the way to the water, so that when the water rises, it can become wetlands, and that wetlands can act as a buffer for the water coming in. But it also means that in certain places that have more hard edge, it's made with riprap, a combination of rocks that then essentially protect the landmass above it. And then you bring in soil that's remediated, that's able to grow vegetative mass. If you put vegetation on that soil and the roots can penetrate, not only could you possibly remediate some of the soil on this toxic site, but you could also start building the soil up with a root system that can adapt and kind of take the force of nature at that point.
Is Harper Square still in this picture?
Not in the 2080s.
Got
So
it.
in the
This is 2080.
Yes, so this is
Okay,
2080s. So in the 2080s, Harper Square is going to be underwater. And so I'm suggesting that Harper Square moves up to Hunter Street, and then that leaves the landmass for another purpose. And in my eyes, that other purpose is a public amenity. That's a publicly accessible waterfront.
And that's the same with those, or that's where the oil tank. This is where the oil tanks are right here. Yeah.
So the oil tanks come offline really quickly. They're going to be underwater in the 2020s. I want to get them out of the way, get that soil, that landmass remediated to whatever degree we can, and then that converts it essentially over to wetlands once I fill that area in.
I missed the beginning of the presentation, but I'm just going to go off what somebody else said to me, because he said that he was really impressed that you really incorporated things like kayaks and mountain bikes and other access to get to the waterfront, so that people aren't, sinking passenger vehicle dependent down there. So if you want to just talk about that tiny little so I can understand it a little bit?
So in my vision, the way that I'm grading the landscape, again, is going to be a really gradual grade so that the wetlands can flourish. And if you pick a resilient planting palette that with plants that are able to deal with salinity changes and deal with major inundation, then those plants can thrive. If you have a thriving wetland, you've got a place that people want to be. And if you're a kayaker or a canoeer, which I am, that's where I want to be, right? So if you start to develop this area into like a nature and cultural district, then and you can bring people here either through ferries or through bus lines, then if you give those people an outlet to be able to rent canoes, rent kayaks, hang out. If you look on the last board, I started the idea of a canoe and kayak path that maybe goes along the entire waterfront that could have elevated, in Florida they're called chiquis. Have you ever heard of a chiqui? It's like a raised, it's a raised building above the water where you can camp. So not only could you do day trips, up to Croton Bay or the mouth of the Croton River, but you could also do overnights, which I think would be kind of cool.
That would be good.
Yeah.
And it looks like you developed all along the kill as well. Not developed, but that you have plantings, and that's also built up along the side of the kill?
No, the kill isn't so much built up. The kill is meant to be flooded now.
Okay.
And so this area, this area into here, I'm suggesting a kind of a robust bridge structure to get across, but that area becomes more of a floodable landscape that's again available to the public. But where the old DPW site is, which is right here, I'm building in some mixed income residential here and here. But in particular up here, the cool thing I think is this idea of having an elevator where you can kind of go down, you can walk in the downtown street, hop through the elevator here, and then make it down to the Sing Sing Kill area, which this trail connects up to the Aqueduct Trail and also connects down to Water Street. But this is a public amenity area that I'm suggesting also builds in some sort of bioswale tiers to take stormwater from the downtown area, remediate that water through a series of tiered bioswales, and cleanse the water before it gets to the Sing Sing Kill. So that water is clean and then available for birds and critters and fish to thrive, which then again kind of circles back to the old recreation as well. So if you have a thriving ecological scene, people will want to be there. And animals will want to be there too.
And the train is...
Train.
It's gone. I don't
train
see it.
is gone.
Okay.
In 2080s, it's gone.
Right, it's
So
gone.
it comes offline in the 2080s.
Right.
And I'm suggesting that, I don't know, maybe 9A is a thoroughfare that could be leveraged.
Right.
But also, the average winter temperature in Ossining in the 2080s is going to be 39 degrees. And so that means less ice, and it means that perhaps the ferry system could be augmented in a really major way. And that could be more of a line of transportation north-south to New York City and back. But yeah, the train's a big issue.
I know. It's interesting because I think that the train was prominently featured in the last rendition of Everybody's, and now it's sort of like, yeah, it's gone. It's a little scary.
I'm keeping it in the 2050s.
Right.
I'm essentially saying, well,
Right.
it needs to be built up 3 feet in the 2050s.
Okay.
It's still feasible, but in the 2080s, my assumption without them at the table is that, it's going to be it's financially not going to be feasible.
All right. Well, thank you. It's again, I think it's really interesting, taking into account what we already have, sort of showing the phased rebuilding of really a wonderful destination, Ossining for ecotourism, I would say, to a certain extent, and then taking advantage of that ecotourism to bring people in and have them get back up to our downtown, which is not going to be fun.
That's right. Higher ground. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you so much. That's really great. I love that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right.
Well, I can talk to you about what true urban is. essentially what true urban is just the connection of what landscape architecture and architecture is to make urban environments, strong urban environments. So it's about the man-made and the natural working together. People's Park is a floodable park, which serves a community of different ages, races, gender, for everything. A big concern was we felt like it couldn't be here, we felt like this park was private, we felt like only certain people could be here, and I'm saying the opposite. No, you can be here. In order to get to that, I broke it up into 3 interventions: raising the rail, creating an under-rail park. The park was about bringing in traffic calming on the street. So with the raised rail, now we have 4 ways directly to get to the park instead of 1 way over a bridge. Bringing age and grow is about bringing in activities and different uses within the parks to bring out different host of characters, people, not characters, to the park. There's more activities, there's more chances for different people to come out. And there's things that can happen in these places, like in the Underrail Park, like food truck Fridays or farmers markets, things that can generate economic value within the space. And there's all sorts of other activities. You can be in the garden, be at the waterfront without having a boat or having to fish. You can fish if you want, but it's not just for fishing, it's for everybody to enjoy. And then over time, these are setting the stages for organisms to take habitat over when we're not physically there anymore.
I think one of the things that's really valuable and interesting about your proposal is focusing on how not just elevating the train solves for the tracks being underwater solution, but your vision for, and you've depicted it with some nice images, for how the being under the tracks is a nice place to be. That's a positive space for people to gather, and it just naturally lends itself to being an organically gathering space, whether there are food trucks there, or there's benches, or there's some shade on a sunny day in the summertime, as opposed to, I lived in Queens for years, and there's some really awful elevated tracks that you do not want to be under in the city, and I think that's a little bit of an adjustment for people to envision that the multiple benefits for the accessibility for vehicles and for pedestrians to cross under the tracks as opposed to just having the 2 bridges, one much further north in the parks. But also that the space underneath is actually an inviting space.
So train station parking would happen throughout the space. So here, and then an off-site parking garage. That's a little further north. These different elements are different elements that are within the park. Playscapes, retaining walls that can be infilled with grass and soil, and then the big berm. And these things are all meant for like human activity and playing on, but can also serve as some ecological value over time, where it can help serve as a breakwater for when flooding does rise in. It can help slow down water. But then over time, it can be an ecological benefit for organisms over time when people aren't there anymore. Now, fish can be here for breeding or eating.
So is your vision that will create this water, the train tracks are elevated 30 feet here, so that there can be roadways for pedestrians and for cars, and accessibility for what you're referring to as a floodable park. So does there come a point where the park is just always underwater?
In 2080, yes, it's looking that way. If things are going to be about 5 feet underwater, we're not going to be there anymore. So that it just doubles for habitat now.
And is this material you're looking at here for the wall, for like the retaining walls and the steps? Where am I seeing that in the design?
You can see them here. So I have them kind of listed retaining walls. So these little highlighted things are retaining walls throughout. The big berm is here, and then also these little playscapes are in the more naturalized forest areas.
Okay. Now, did you address what's going to happen to? Is this building? Is Harbor Square staying?
Harbor Square staying is good. I think it's still a good generator of money for the city. Also, it's just built, and we can't just pick up a building and throw it somewhere else.
Well, some of the designs have it going away.
I know, but it's about being contextual, and realistically, you just can't demolish a brand new building.
So some of the other big things on the waterfront that would have to have some engineering to be able to be preserved are the Sing Sing Prison Museum, and then right next to that is the county's wastewater treatment facility. How do you accommodate for those or address those in your design?
From what I've gained talking to representatives from both, it seemed like the prison museum is technically out of the floodplain, and then the wastewater treatment plant already has a plan of building a levee wall around itself to protect it. And they're not moving, and they won't take anything from me. So I said, okay, I'll just work around you and just build some dense planting around in case of an overflow. We can have overflow incident spaces where these can help naturalize and purify what's in it, the waste. So if then it becomes that, let's hope it doesn't. I can't really touch anything that they don't want to move.
Well, the reality is it's a gravity-fed system.
Yeah, it can't move.
Yeah, so there's going to either be major engineering to move it or major engineering to preserve it in its location. So
I can just vegetate around it and just make it a greener space to help absorb any discharge.
Great. Well, thanks so much you guys really spent a lot of time getting to know our community and thinking deeply about who we are and what we can be in the future. Thank you, Juan. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
At this space will be on this in the future. The second type is the bulkhead, which like a small symbol will protect the building behind it. You can see the black dot lines, and limited to the high cost, I just protect the building behind it, not all the space. And the third is wetland here. The wetland, I believe the water, its plants and topo can absorb the water and mitigate the wave energy due to the storm, and just serve function like a buffer when the storm comes. The second line is about the track protection. The track protection, I propose to raise the railway like 6 feet. You can see the section of the railway. So I raised like 6 feet, just like a small levee in the middle of the site, and combined with several green space, terrace space, which can connect it to the parks in the first part, and also in the Sing Sing Creek area, I just put a small Sing Sing Creek floodgate, which people can also cross under it in normal times, and when the severe storm comes, the floodgate can still function as well. The third part is about inner protection. I create a linear sunken space to absorb the water from the city, because this site is down the hill, and when the rainfall comes, the water from the city will rush into this side, and once this side will be flooded from the inside. So I just create this space that water can across all the process, wetland process to slower the water flow and also somehow purify the water, which will finally goes into the Sing Sing Creek, goes into Sing Sing Creek and goes into the river. And this site is mainly about city development. I think in some places land use will be changing, might be changed in the future. So this mainly about two groups, which are warehouse right now, I believe, and might be changed into like residential, retail, dining, parking space, storage combination, like a multi-function group. And you can see the scenario. People can cross from uphill into this building and down to the building and into this waterfront level, just to make more accessibilities. And also in the first and second floor to make it more floodable and like a semi-open space and garage, which is okay to be flooded in sometimes.
Sure.
The third floor is mainly about the facing plan. I highlight just like the area will be severe impacted by the water level scenario. Like I wrote here, like 20, 50 years, 9 feet, 100 years, 30 feet. So you can see the outline of the docks will be smaller and smaller, and the green space will be also smaller in the future due to the sea level change. And so I wrote the key change on the top of it. So like in 2020 to 2050, the priority to change this space is mainly about the water edge, because to change the edge type to prevent the flood from outside immediately. And after 2050, it's like raise the railway, because this space is much more frequently impacted by the storm or some surge. So after 2080, it's time to change the space inside to coordinate with space outside to make the waterfront as a whole to serve a function for this site. And the fourth board is mainly about the rendering. You can see the track levee behind it, the green space around the street, and also the Ossining trolley I want to introduce again. To this site, people can take public transportation to this site, not only by their own cars. And the second rendering is about Sing Creek. You can see the Sing Creek goes under the railway, and people can also cross it under it. And the Sing Creek serves the function as a wetland to absorb the water. And also, you can see the flooding gate area that can serve the function when the storm comes. Yeah, that's about my project.
Starting from the end here, I really I like the way you have, because right now what this is it's like a canal, and so you've opened this up because that will do a better job at absorbing the water and not and minimizing the flooding in that area, right? Why did you? And everybody loves the trolley idea. I think when you first proposed that, we were all really excited about that because and I assume that allows us to have maybe some less parking on site for the train as well, to have really easily accessible shared transit. Why did you decide to go with a berm at least till 2050, knowing that by 2080 it's going to have to be elevated?
So like you mean
for the train tracks?
So raise the train track. I mentioned that it's make more frequent impacted by the water level change. You can see the black line is the railway, and that's good. And it's only 100 years flooding events will be reached to the railway. And but at the time of 2050, it's much more frequent to reach this site. So it's so when in 2020 it can be handled by the basic sandbags or flooding panels to prevent the water to across the railway. But when it becomes much more frequent, I think the raise the railway is much easier way to prevent the water.
So you do because you're one of the few that doesn't, that it seems like that you even suggest the berm, but you still, the berm is only going to take us through to the 2050 lines. By the time we're planning for 2080, it does have to be elevated, and then the water would just go underneath it. That's my understanding of your proposal. Is that right?
So it's only the berm, the levee will exist in the future, but only you can see clearly 2080 and 100-year flooding will across above the railway.
Yeah.
But most of the storm events will be blocked by the levee.
I really like terrace sparks. I love this look, and so this will, and it's also it's beautiful and very functional for people while the park is still accessible to us. And then I assume that it's all designed so that as the water levels rise, the river just takes that back. Yeah. So the other thing that's unique about creating the berm is it creates a whole new ecosystem on the inland side of the tracks. That's essentially a water feature on the east side of the tracks, right?
Yeah.
And is that permanently there, or is that only when we have flooding?
It's permanently there. I think. Just like green space system here, but when severe rainfall precipitation comes, it will be water in this site. But in normal time, just like a sunken space or a rainwater garden.
It would still be inviting for people.
Yeah. It's also for people to participate in events.
It would actually be a positive thing. And then I think I noticed in some of, and I'm trying to remember where it was, that you have some barriers created to protect some of the key infrastructure that's on the waterfront. Yes, there it is. That's the one I was thinking. Yeah, because here's our sanitary sewer treatment facility, right? And this is sanitary sewer. Okay. And what do we have here? And here's the Sing Sing Prison Museum is back here. Which is this building? This is the building, the QWC building. Okay, right. And but you, what happens to Harbor Square? Is that this building right here?
Yeah, Harbor Square. So it's the wetland in front of the Harbor Square, and also the Harbor Square some high elevation that will be affected, will not be affected by the water level change.
You feel that it's been designed in a way that it will sustain the water level rise even through 2080.
So like in 2080, you can say the basic scenario that it wouldn't be flooded in today.
Okay, great.
Venice.
Pardon?
Be like Venice.
Well, let's hope we do a better job than Venice, and making use of our public funds to plan for the future.
This is not a delta, so it's not going to sink.
Well, thank you.